All right. How you guys doing? So my name is Eric Bichard. I'm from Fremont, California. I am one of the newest members of the developer advocate team for KendoReact and on the developer team, period. You can check out KendoReact at that URL down there. But today I'm not going to be talking about KendoReact, I'm just going to be talking about React. And some of the releases that we've had over the last 2018, kind of what features have been brought into React, and then also where we're going with React kind of in 2019 in the next release. So this is the title of my talk, Getting Hooked on React, my journey as a software engineer to developer advocate. And that's just going to be a short intro. When we really get into the meat of the talk, it's going to be mostly about React. Again, some of the features we've got in 2018 and where we're going. So, like I said in the agenda, we're going to have a short intro. I'm going to talk about how I retrained over the last summer to start using React. I used to be an Angular developer at Tesla. And in my road to developer advocacy and joining Progress, which, by the way, I think is a great company, and they put on a great event. Let a few more people trickle in. We're going to go through React in 2018, release by release, every single one of them, and talk about how the React team is bringing features for state management into React Core. We're also going to go over some other things that have been coming in, notable things to think about that have been added to the library, which I believe is becoming more of a framework now. Cool. So, the road to Sophia. This is the first time I've ever been out of the US, and this is the first introduction I have to kind of an international audience. And so far, I love it. I love the city. I love Rakia. That's some good stuff. I've had it every single night that I've been here. I'll have some more tonight, and I'll have some more tomorrow night, too. The last week, this is kind of my schedule over the last week. It's been busy, delays, stress, alarms, all sorts of stuff. A week ago, I was not giving a talk here. There was a guy named Ed Charbonneau, who's one of my friends, and he was supposed to be doing a talk on functional C#, but he had some family issues and had to stay home, so I'm now here talking about React. It's one of the things that I do anytime I can find an opportunity to commit to something. I feel like success really requires stepping outside of your comfort zone, and it's a forcing function to make you do things like committing yourself to a talk, committing yourself to a meetup, committing yourself to things that you're not comfortable with. I believe that this is very key to becoming a professional, especially in this industry. So let me tell you a little bit about myself. I'll start a little bit before this. I lived in Central Florida, Orlando, Disney World, you know, and I was a freelance developer, and in 2015, I moved to San Mateo, California to work for SolarCity. We deployed solar to rooftops, and I was very interested in solar and very interested in renewable energies, so that's why I went to go work there. But SolarCity was a part of a company of 3 different companies, were sister companies, and they had a lot of overlapping of investors, chairmen, people that sat on boards, and eventually Tesla acquired SolarCity. So I ended up at Tesla. Some of the things I did at Tesla was I organized meetups. I brought in the Angular team to work with our developers there to train them on Angular. And mostly what I did there was UI design. So we have service centers all around the world. And one of the things that we needed to do was to create a new UI for some of our service centers. So that's what I did for the year and a half that I worked at Tesla. And so eventually Tesla swallowed SolarCity, and it just became Tesla and SpaceX now. I'm sure some of you guys know that. I also organized stuff like hikes. Again, things that put me outside of my comfort zone, committing to things. I think this is very important to do at your jobs. The kind of sad story, the sad part about all this is that in 2018, Tesla had a lot of layoffs. They laid off 10% of the company, 4,000 people, and I was one of them. But there's an act in California that says by law, you can't release that many people from a company and not give them enough time to train and retrain on so they can find a new job. So that's exactly what I did, and I trained on React. When I worked at Solar City, I was hired as a front-end engineer, and they made me do C# and back-end for 2 years. And I wanted to point out these two books because they've been very instrumental in learning design patterns and building myself as a developer, soft skills and everything. So just wanted to point those out. A friend of mine wrote this book here, John Sonmez. He helped me get my job at Solar City. And I think this is a very good book if you're an introvert like I was a little bit, and kind of help you come out of your shell. And then obviously the Design Patterns Gang of Four book. Some of you all probably know what that is. And it was interesting to see how much when I left from doing C# and API design and backend and moving over to JavaScript, I had left JavaScript for about 2 years. But when I came back, all of this stuff was all of a sudden applicable to JavaScript design, especially with Angular and TypeScript that I was doing at Tesla. This is me and my family. It's not my car. I wish it was my car. But one of the perks at Tesla was we could take cars and go down to LA or something on a vacation. And so, yeah, this is me and my family down in Newport Beach having fun. My son takes great pictures, as you can see. Yep. So yeah, again, in summer 2018, I left Tesla and started a new journey. I retrained myself in React, found my dream job. I put that slide in there for my boss, and started working at Progress, which I think is a great company. One of the things I'd like you guys to do is check out some of the articles that I've written while I've been at Progress. So creating a successful meetup at your company, that's all about the meetups that I created at Tesla. I also wrote an article on Hello, Create React App, because Create React App came out with a version 2. So you can walk through and figure out how to if you haven't worked with React before, you can walk through that tutorial and get a pretty good idea of how to use the CLI to build a React application. Also, if you go to the KendoReact page on Telerik, you'll see a sales dashboard, which is something that we showcase that you can build with our tools. And so I wrote an article on how to build that same dashboard. I also help to maintain the All Things React blog post. I wrote a software engineering to developer advocate. So if you're thinking of ever going into developer advocacy, maybe you might want to read that article. And I'm coming out with something on hooks in React very soon. But you'll also see a lot of that information in this talk. So quickly, I want to get a show of hands of people in here who works with UI, who works with components, any of that kind of stuff. Good. How many of you guys are Angular developers? It's all right. How many React developers? Awesome. So about 50-50 of the people who raise their hands. So what I would say is that in 2019, if you are a Angular developer, if you're not using React, maybe you should take a look into it. That's all I'm saying. So what we'll cover, these are all the releases that we've had this year in React, and I'm going to go through each one of them. They're pretty well spaced out. One of them is actually not a React release. It's a Create React App 2 release. So I'll talk about that a little bit. And where we're going to start is with React 16.3. So this was the first release in 2018 in React. And has anyone used Context API in React? Yeah? Show of hands? Cool. So before 16.3, the Context API was experimental. And what the Context API lets you do is it lets you, let's say that you have a component and it has a lot of child components inside of it. It allows you to very easily set a context so that you can use data throughout all of those components without passing data down through components in what we call like prop drilling, or there's lots of other, tightly coupling, all sorts of different names for it. The Context API before 16.3 had many issues. It was experimental, and it was not encouraged to be used in React. Instead, they would ask you to go out and get Redux or MobX, bring that into React, and use that instead, even for simple stuff. So after 16.3, the Context API goes from experimental to an actual stable feature. And again, it lets you take many nested components and let them share a similar context or a similar set of data without any prop drilling. And one of the things I say is that if you have your component and you're passing an input into a component, you're passing data into an input, and then that one has a component inside of it, and you're passing data again and over and over and over, I feel that 3 levels is actually already too deep. If you start to get 3 levels in, if you're not just doing it once or twice, it's too much. And you need to either reach for something like Redux or not, because now with the Context API, I feel like you don't have to reach for Redux anymore. So what I'm going to show you first is a few simple examples using StackBlitz. Who uses StackBlitz in here? Only one? Cool. This is going to be cool. You're going to like this. All right, let's go here. Did I get it right? Does it make sense? Awesome. I use Google Translate. So I'm going to show you exactly what I mean by prop drilling. Can you guys see this very well, or is it hard to see? Okay, great. So what we have is we have an app. Typically, when you start to create React app, or whenever you, and actually, just really quick, for those of you who don't know what StackBlitz is, I'm going to show you real quick, because I'm going to show you how easy it is to be an Angular developer, a React developer, an RxJS developer, a TypeScript developer, a Svelte developer, an Ionic developer. It's this easy. Let's see if it loads, see if we got good internet here. Boom. I've got a React app. Right? That easy. So if you don't know React and you're wanting to try and learn React, or maybe Angular or Ionic or any of these other frameworks, just go to StackBlitz. The guys who built it are awesome, and I'm glad that I'm able to use a product like this. It makes it really easy to go out and do talks. I can set all my different demos up in a row, and then just kind of walk right through them and show you, and that's what I'm going to do now. So typically you have an app. A class that's an app at the very root of your application in React. And typically what you do is you'll create a state object, and you'll have some information, some data inside that state object. And you'll want to use it in several components. Really, all I'm doing is rendering one component here, and it's called a greeting component. And that's what everything here on the right-hand side is. It's just this one greeting component. But inside it, it has more components. So the way that I do this is I create a data input, and I pass this .state into it. That comes here through the props, and then I'm able to use props.data.greeting. And then I can also pass more information into person. So the top one is actually the greeting, and then where it says Eric, that is the person component, and I'm just passing in more data there. And if we go down to person, we see that this is the data, again, props. It's getting passed in through props. So when you hear props, that means basically data being passed into a component. Again, I'm passing it one more time into another component called product. So we have a chain of components. We have greeting, we've got person, and we have product. So greeting is the kind of greeting at the top. Person is whoever it's about, and then we have product, and that's kind of what product I work on at Progress. But what you can see is that we have to pass data into every single component here, and this creates a little bit of tight coupling. If you then want to go back and change your data or change the name of some of the things that you're passing in, you're going to have to come back and update some of this stuff sometimes. So the next demo I'm going to show you is in 16.3, we were able to bring in the Context API and kind of get rid of some of this. And instead of reaching for Redux, we can do something a little bit better. Now, I do want to say that this is not a less verbose example. However, I do think it is a better way of doing things. So the way that you work with a context is very easy. You create a constant up here. I typically think that you're supposed to start with a capital, no big deal. When we do, and by the way, you don't have to bring in anything extra to create context. It's already part of React. So you've already imported React. You have to have React in your project anyways, so you've already got it, might as well use it. So you just do React create context, and at that point you can create a provider. And if you work with Angular, you probably understand what a provider is. It works similar in React. It's a little bit different, but it's similar. And what I'm doing is I've moved my state from my app, which I don't think it should have been there anyways, right? Because this state was based around my greeting not around the class that is app. So I've moved it up into my provider. So that's where I have the information stored now. And basically what I'm able to do is I'm able to, instead of passing this into all of my components, I'm just going to pass it into the greeting context provider. And I pass it in through a value, and I just basically say, I create an object, and I say, there's going to be a key in there called state, and we're going to pass this.state in there. Why do we use this.state? Because we're inside of a class. The rest of these are, so one thing I should point out is that this is a class component. These are functional components. So as we move down, you're noticing that in my app down here, I just use the greeting component. I don't pass any data into it, right? And then if we go up to our greeting component, what we do, let's ignore this React fragment up here. I'm going to talk about that in a second, because that's also something, we didn't get that in 16.3, but we got it in the release before. But that was 2017, and I'm not talking about 2017. So what you do is you, inside of you have to create a context consumer. Just like you create a context provider, you create a context consumer to consume the data. You have a provider and a consumer of that data. We have these curly braces here, which just means, hey, we're executing some JavaScript here. And you can name this whatever you want. I call it context because I think it makes the most sense. So we take context, we pass it in. We're then creating a p tag, and we're then saying context.state.message. So that's how we get the access to our message, right? Same thing with the person component. Same thing with the product component. There's no passing of data down through each one of them. The one thing I will say about React Fragment, and that if you're an Angular developer, you'll know there's something similar in Angular. Forgive me because I don't remember what it's called, but when you want to wrap a bunch of first rule in React, when you have JSX, you have to have a parent node and then a bunch of nodes inside of that. You can't have sibling nodes all at the top level in your JSX. So we either create a div at the top, or we create a React fragment at the top. So the React fragment will keep it from having an extra layer in your HTML with a div, and it'll just render zero div there. And this one here, you'll actually get a div wrapped around your greeting component. So if you were to look at Eric, if you were to look at this component, you would actually see that's the person component, and you would see no div around it. But if you looked at this one, if you drilled down into that one, into the F12 tools, dev tools, you would actually see a div wrapped around that one. So just wanted to point out the difference between a React.fragment wrapping your components and your items inside your component versus a div. No big deal. So that's all well and good, but we also may need to do a little bit more in our component. So what if we have to set state? So I wanted to show you how to do that real quick. So basically, we have a button down here that lets me change the team that I work with. So if I didn't like React and I wanted to go work for Angular, well, I could just go ahead and change that state and update it. Now, in order to do that without the provider, it's a little bit different than you do it here. But what you do is in your provider, right next to where you create your state, you can create a key, which equals a function. And then that function simply changes the state using setState, and then anyone using that data will get the data passed back down to it. It'll be a consumer, so it gets updated whenever that data changes. So if we press this button, we're going to execute change product team, and it should change me from a KendoReact developer advocate to an Angular developer, or developer advocate, which I don't want to do that, so we're going to go ahead and get rid of that. Cool. So that's a few examples of how to do that. Sorry about that. So another few notable mentions in React 16.3 is string refs are kind of being deprecated now. There's a lot of problems in string refs which allow you to basically take an element inside of your DOM and make a reference to it. We used to be able to do that with strings. You don't want to do that anymore. If you see a project in React doing that, you should probably replace it with an object ref, which is a lot better than using a string ref. And you also have the opportunity to use callbacks for more advanced uses. And you can also forward a ref, which helps you to, I guess the easiest way to explain it without going too deep is for kind of nested selections of elements inside of your DOM. creating a reference to them. One more notable mention is that we're getting rid of some lifecycle components, and this is the first thing that I really want you to pay attention to because I believe this set in motion the React team starting to get away from making people have to pull in Redux for very simple reasons, for very simple state management. Getting rid of some of these lifecycle methods make room for hooks and the future of what we're trying to do in React. And you'll see that that's kind of the theme through this talk, is showing how as we progress through 2018, we're getting rid of old stuff, we're bringing new stuff in, we're going to start writing React in a new way. But the cool thing about it is that you can use these new features right next to the old ones side by side and don't have to worry about anything. React is not making any breaking changes. They're bringing in really ground-breaking features, but they're not making major version changes, which I think is good. In 16.4, we got pointer events. So we're going beyond the mouse. And basically what this means is that since about 2005, we've been seeing more devices, tablets, pointers, styluses, different ways to interact with the screen. And all the browsers that utilize these events need the frameworks that help you build applications, they need to be able to have access to these events. So React gives us some of these in React 16.4. So why are pointer events needed? Again, we're no longer needing to just listen for mouse events. We have many devices that are not correlating at all to a mouse. Phones have touch surfaces, they have styluses, and they also have multi-finger gestures that you can use and that need to be considered when building applications today. Then we have React 16.5, and this is something that I don't play around with enough, but it's super helpful if you want to be able to profile your application and understand how it's loading and how it's working. And if you download the React Dev Tools, this now ships with those Dev Tools. I'm just going to show you a few slides that kind of show how it works. So this is the Profiler tab whenever you're using the React Dev Tools. It's similar to the Angular Dev Tools when you first look at it. However, what they have now is they have a Profiler tab. So basically, you can open up your application, and what I tell people, if they want to see this thing in action, the best thing to do is to pull up Instagram, the actual website, log into it, open up the React Profiler, and then hit Start. Once you hit Start, it's going to start recording. Then you go click around on a couple Instagram posts, play a video, go to someone's page, go back, and start and move around, do a couple of actions, and then you hit Stop. And at that point, you're going to get some charts that show you how which components are being loaded, how long they take to load, how many times they're rendering, and lots of information that you can use to profile your app to make it perform better. This is just a little bit of animation. This is right off the React docs site too. So one of the other things I think is great about React that I didn't see in some of the frameworks that I worked in the past was really, really, really good docs. They have probably the best docs that I've ever worked with, or at least I think that they are. And the reason is because they have a blog and they have docs right next to each other, kind of in the same place on the website, and they kind of interact with each other. And people like Dan Abramov and a couple other people on the React core team, they help to write these blogs, and they write really good documentation, and they spend a lot of time on it. So that's one thing I would tell you is go to the docs, read about it, and it's so easy to go in there and learn about things and start using new features of React. You can also do a ranked chart, which just ranks your components in the order that they load. And you have a bar chart, which just shows you a bar chart. It's just a different view of looking at your components. And then obviously on the right-hand side, you can see your props. You can see all the data that you're dealing with in your application. You can drill into those and find out what your data shapes are and everything. And it's just a really cool way to explore your application, to find out how it's working, and to make sure it's performing properly. Actually, the best way to get more information on the React Dev Tools, and this specifically, is a deep dive video that Brian Vaughn does. He's another member of the React core team. And you can just search for Deep Dive with React Dev Tools Profiler or Introducing the React Profiler. Either of those are going to kind of take you to more information about this. So I definitely recommend doing that. This next one is not a React release, But and this is the React CLI. So do most people use the Create React app whenever they create a React app? That sounds so weird. Or do they use something else? So raise your hand if you use Create React app, literally to generate your production apps. Even if you eject from it. No? So you build them from scratch? Cool. But as someone who's becoming new to React, this is a very easy way to start learning React. Just like I showed you on StackBlitz, how you can easily kind of spin up a React application. Create React app kind of lets you do the same thing with NPM. And the reason why they had to make a change to Create React app was because the major dependencies started getting updated, and we didn't have those pulled into Create React app. So Babel 7, Webpack 4, Jest 23, all of these we needed another Create React app because of these changes. Plus, we had a bunch of features that were kind of in the backlog that needed to be put into the new version. Some of the features that we have now with Create React App 2 is that you can work with Sass and CSS right out of the box. No extra configuration. That's great. You can create SVGs as components in JSX. You got smaller CSS bundles. Better syntax for React fragments. I showed you guys React fragments. That new syntax is now available, I guess, in Create React App 2. I don't understand how that works, but you think that would already be part of it. Opt-in approach to using service workers. So typically when you create a Create React app, in version 1, you had service workers and you had a PWA right off the bat. But this confused a lot of people, especially people that were new. So now you have to kind of go in and change 2 letters in a file to kind of activate the service workers. You change something from saying unregistered to register. It's like that small of a change, and then you can have you can start to use the PWA features in Create React app. We also had a little bit of a refresh to the actual app that it creates for you. On the left is version 1, and on the right is version 2. No big deal, but yeah, a little bit different look and feel to the application when you kick it off. I always just wipe that out anyways and delete it. So for a complete walkthrough of Create React App, search that, and you'll find my blog on Telerik, and you can kind of walk through that and find out more about Create React App. React 16.6. And there was a few releases in the 16.6x version, finding Memo. And what you got out of this was memoization, lazy loading, and context type. So let's go over those really quick. So memoization is, if you know what memoization is, it's pretty obvious what's happening here. You have pure components and pure functions. That's what you think of when you think of memoization. You think of, well, if I'm using a function and I'm passing, if it's an add function or a sum function, I'm passing the same 2 numbers in all the time. I don't want it to have to do this stuff inside the function over and over. I just want to be able to take a cached version of that result and use that. It's a very basic example of it. So you can do that also with with React components. So before, only class components were able to take advantage of this. And now, by using pure component and should component update. But now you can actually, with React Memo, you can use it on functional components also. In Angular, you had a lot of lazy loading features. React now brings those in through suspense. So if you just import lazy and suspense, and you can see right here, if import the other component, that is a dynamic import. But if other component hasn't loaded yet, we need to have some type of way of showing a loader. So this just shows a div loading, no big deal. But you can do other things there, have logic, have a different component that loads there, a spinner, whatever, so that you're able to lazily import things when you need them. And if it hasn't loaded, you have some type of a fallback. Static context type is also something that we got in this version. And it's a convenient way to use the context API in a class-based component. So I showed you earlier how to use the context API, and I was mainly showing you how to do that in functional components. And it's not that you couldn't do it in class components. It was just a little bit weirder to do it in class components. And I know that when I first started messing around with it, I got tripped up a little bit, and I thought, well, I would just try to change them to a functional component, but you can't always do that. So this just makes it really easy to use them in class components. It's super easy. This doesn't show where I've created the provider, the context, but what I can do, I can create the context somewhere else and then refer to it here and then use it inside my component did mount, and then maybe use it inside my render. So finally, we have React hooks. And this is not out yet. Has anyone here played with React hooks yet? No? Good. So React hooks is the next kind of phase, and what I'm trying to tell people is the reason why you're not going to have to reach for Redux immediately whenever you start a simple application. You want to do simple state management. And I'm also thinking that with context API, lazy loading, memoization, and now hooks, I know that everyone's always said that React is a library and Angular is a framework. And I don't think that React's a framework yet, but I do think we're getting closer to it. I do think that we can do a lot more now than we used to be able to do a year or two ago, just with installing React, importing a few things, and really state management was the biggest problem, and why a lot of people were turned off. People that I knew were turned off from React was because of having to use something like Redux when they just wanted to do simple state management. And set state is something that I'm not saying we're trying to get away from it, but set state has its own problems. So now we're able to use other things instead. So this is a little bit overview of the final things that we're going to talk about, and it's all about kind of the future of React. So one of the things that the React team did was they created a request for comments. Whenever they bring in a new feature, they don't just throw it on you and tell you that the way you're doing things is wrong and just tell you, here's how we're going to start doing things. What they do is they create an RFC and they post it onto GitHub. And you can go on there and then you can comment. You can give them your advice. You can give them what you feel about it. You can basically chime in and let them know how you feel about these things before they adopt them into the framework, library, whatever you want to call it. They use a gradual adoption strategy, which I think makes all their developers happy. We're going to talk about hooks, how to use them, and we're also going to go about where you can find documentation and early resources on React hooks and kind of the future of React. So here's kind of what the request for comments looks like if you go there onto GitHub and check it out. Basically, I couldn't fit the whole thing on here, but if you were to scroll down, you would see people commenting on it, telling them what they think about use state and use effect and all these different things that we're getting to help us not only manage state better, but be able to use reducers without bringing in Redux. So all these things are very cool, and if you want to learn more, if you get through all the documentation and the demos on how to use React hooks and use state and use effect and all these great things that we're getting, this is another place that you can go for more information and find out what people are talking about it, they're saying, and then maybe even find out information about when it's coming out. So again, I talk about a gradual adoption strategy. React typically tries this over anything else. They get feedback from the community, they patch, they fix, they update, and then eventually they release after they've gotten a lot of feedback about it. And I believe that this is why some React developers are so loyal to React. Now this post, although it doesn't have any, this thread here on Twitter doesn't have anything to do currently with React and their gradual adoption of hooks. However, I did want to focus on one of the tweets because if you know who Dan Abramov is, he's just a really sweet guy, and I think that his idea of kind of how to introduce new things to the framework is awesome. So imagine React adoption. Instead of showing how to use it in existing apps and libs, it just doubled down and said you're all wrong, and that was the narrative. That would kind of suck. They don't do that. And again, what I was trying to say is that over 2018, we've gotten a lot of really cool stuff that we can do in React now, and we've never bumped to a major version, right? We've never made breaking changes while bringing those things in. You can choose to use hooks, right, and use state right next to, some of the legacy features, set state and all that stuff. So you don't have to go and change all your code right at first. You can start bringing in the new stuff, use it sparingly, and as you want to gradually change the other things, you can do that. So how can you use hooks which is only in an alpha version right now today? It's really easy. You do npm install react at next, and of course you also got to bring in react at DOM next to, right? At next to. And this will give you the latest version. So if you're not sure if there's been an update to the alpha, maybe there's an 16.7.1 alpha now, but you don't know, just do at next, and it'll give you whatever the latest thing is. It's the easiest way to do it. So React hooks. Hooks give functional components the upper hand in React. They allow access to local state, application lifecycle methods, and context specifically. What we're going to talk about today is local state and application lifecycle methods and how you can use them with React hooks. Now, the easiest thing that I can show you of how to use React hooks is actually showing you how to use useState. This is a class component. This is how we did things in the past. So you would create, this.state up here. Those lights make the black harder to see. I don't know. Hopefully you can see that. Also, I have lights shining in my eyes, so I don't know if that's dark or not. So if you needed to increment your count, so we basically have a count variable in state and an object with a count variable, and then we want to increment that, so we've got to use this state, this.setState, and all we're doing here is taking count and increasing it by 1. No big deal. But this is how you would do that in a class component. Now with hooks and using functional components, it looks like this. So not that big of a change, but it is better. And I think you can see if you had a lot of these going on, and you can use this over and over, this const count, set count, useState, you can use that for a bunch of different variables right in a row, and it's completely okay. But this, it gets rid of some code. It gets rid of code so that you have less verbose code, and it makes it to where you can access this stuff right from a functional component, which you can't do right now. If you can, let me know. So the way that useState works is it returns a set of variables, an array of 2 different variables. So count is your actual variable that you want to trace that number, so that as you click that increment button, you want to keep updating that count. But where's set state? Set state's not here, so we're not using set state. So when you use useState, what you're actually doing is you're saying I'm creating a variable and I'm creating a way to update that. And then whenever on your onClick, all you have to do is call a function which uses setCount, and then inside setCount, you put the logic of how to update that thing. It's that easy. Now, this is a very simple example, but imagine if you could use a reducer there instead, right? Instead of that count plus 1, what if you had a reference to a reducer there? Well, you can actually do that too. I'm not going to show you exactly how to do that, but if you basically just read through some very simple docs, you can find out how to use reducer also. So let's see a couple of these examples in StackBlitz. All right, so here's the class example that I showed you. And again, you can just kind of click this, and it increases the count. And again, here's the code that it uses. It's the same code that I showed you before. And then here's the functional example of the counter, right? So I just wanted to show you that this code actually works. It looks very minimal. It doesn't. When I first saw it, I thought, how the hell is that going to work? It didn't seem like it would work. But obviously, there is some magic going on behind the scenes. They do understand that there is some kind of pushback to that magic, right? Typically, developers who use React don't like a lot of magic. Maybe Angular developers do, but React developers typically don't. However, I think that what was very key about when they demonstrated this the first time at React Conf 2018 is that they got Dan Abramov up on stage to show how to use this, right? And I think that that's a very big a statement, because he's the one who created Redux. He's the one who is the main contributor to Redux. So if he's getting up and advocating for this from the core team, then it must be something, right, that's good. Or at least we can say, maybe we'll tolerate this magic until we find out a little bit more of it, because at least, it's Dan doing it, right? So this is great. You can use state. You can do simple state management. But what about updates and then doing something with the data once you've updated it, right? So let's say that when I updated that count, that I wanted to do something like save off to the database, save off to local storage, do something in local storage. So what I'm going to show you is what they show in the docs is a very simple example. We're not going to actually save off to a database or go into IndexedDB or local storage. Instead, we're just going to update the document title, So here's how you would do that with that functional component example that I showed you. Let's give you a second to look at this. So at the top, you have use state. The 0 is the initial value that you're going to set count to. Again, set count is going to be the method that updates your count, and you're going to update it in the same way. Nothing else has changed. The only thing we've done is we've said use effect. So use effect is going to allow you to add a side effect. And these aren't the side effects that people tell you not to use in programming. These are good side effects. These are things that need to be done. So what this application is going to do is that whenever I click that counter and I increase it, not only is it going to increase it on the render on the page, but I'm going to go ahead and update the document title. And yeah, it's just up at the tab in the browser, but it is outside of the React application, so to speak, right? You're interfacing with something outside of React, and I think this is cool. So imagine if you wanted to do anything like that, just stick it right here in the middle of use effect, and you're gonna get all of your work done, and it's gonna be able to go out and do that, and it's gonna do it every time that you update that value. Here's what that would look like using classes and lifecycle methods, right? So the biggest problem here is that we're repeating code. Now I know that I don't have to duplicate that document.title equals whatever. I could put that into a function and then just refer to a function there. But I'm still referring to the function twice and calling that in 2 different places. So this, and then I'm also using set state here, which has its issues. So again, and then we've also got a lot more verbose code now. So I think that you can understand where we're going with these hooks, and that this is what's coming, and you're going to be able to do this in the next version of React, so long as too many people don't get upset in the RFC and they don't release it for some crazy reason. But this is pretty much all finalized. I don't think any of the APIs are going to change. This is what it will look like. Well, not this is, but that's what it will look like, right? And that's what it used to look like. So again, let's look at those examples real quick in StackBlitz. This is not a StackBlitz commercial, I promise you. Cool, so I'm going to pop this out of its window here so that you can actually see it working. And again, it's the same example. So I want you to watch right up here. Unfortunately, I can't make that any bigger. But as I change that value, you're going to see it change here. And it also changes up there. So that's that use effect working, right? That's that use effect going out and changing that document title. This one here is the old way of doing it. And it works just the same. It's actually no different. Yeah, there's some different stuff going on underneath the hood, but nothing to be concerned about with us, right? Works fine. So how can I learn more about hooking? In React, of course. Well, it's very easy. Just go to the docs. See this over here? This is on the docs. Hooks, proposal. Introducing hooks, hooks at a glance, using the state hook, using the effect hook. Those are the things I just showed you, right? And in there, you'd also learn how to use context. So think about Context API and what we were doing with Context API, and now think of, instead of creating the providers in the context, what if you could just hook into it? That's what hooks are for. Now, it doesn't just stop there. You can hook into reducers. You can create your own hooks. You can create custom hooks. You can create hooks into things that aren't even thought of yet. And actually, I don't have the link on here, and I should have put it on here. I thought about it just before I started the talk, but there is a whole list on GitHub of custom hooks that other people have created as they've started to play with this, and they're amazing. IndexedDB, local storage, anything, right? Hook into it and use it with hooks. So if you want to get more information on how to use React hooks, and basically everything else that I've talked about in this, you can go here. Don't put the spaces in, but go here, and you're going to get a link to every single StackBlitz that I created. And so if you want to go to the docs and you want to walk through the docs, the one thing I would criticize about the docs for hooks right now is that, for instance, like if I would remember on the Angular docs, you would go through some of the documentation and they'd have like nice little stack blitz examples and everything. For some reason, they don't have that inside the hooks documentation. So what I've done is I've created them for you. I only showed you 4 of them, but I went through and created a stack blitz example for every single thing that they do inside that introducing hooks documentation, so that as you're reading through it, you can click over to my stack blitzes and kind of follow along one by one and go through each of them and have a working example and see exactly how it works. Because that's how, as developers, we learn things. We see it, we read it, we take it in, and then we play with it. So that's what I wanted to give you guys. So I think I have 9 examples on hooks, and then those 3 examples of use context, and they're all here at this link. And if I can think of anything else that I think is pertinent to the talk that we've had today and learning more about React, then I'll add those into there tonight so that if you guys go there, you have all these resources, the early resources, not only on hooks, but everything else that we've talked about. So what I would suggest that you do in 2019 is if you're not using React already, and if you're not using especially Telerik's KendoReact, is to start looking into this. I've showed you some really good reasons why I think you should start thinking about React, and if you're an Angular developer, why you should switch over. And yeah, that's what I want you to think about in 2019 is React. My name is Eric Bichard. Here's how you can get a hold of me. That is my Twitter. I live in San Francisco, so if you're there, hit me up. We'll go have a beer. And thank you very much. Also, one more thing. I've got a crap load of t-shirts up here. They're all KendoReact t-shirts and a few Angular ones. So if you want one, just come up and grab one. Thanks.